Okay, so Mayor Ramsey is here. We do have a quorum. Roger's going to be late because he's at the opioid meeting, so I'll let you get us underway.
Awesome. Welcome, and thank you for your patience. It was an interesting commute this morning. It took a lot longer than anticipated. Thank you for being here at the Utah League of Cities and Towns board meeting. By way of introduction, we have a lot of new people here, and I'd love to. How do you think is the best way to do that?
We'll just
Kind
go
of
around the room and
right?
then we can go down the list and have everybody introduce themselves.
Yeah, I would love that. Okay, my name is Dawn Ramsey, and I'm the mayor of South Jordan City, and I'm the new president of the league for this year. And I appreciate the chance to serve with all of you and your willingness to be part of our executive board. This is a great group, and appreciate all of you. So let's make our way around. If Jen will do in person first and just do introductions, then we'll come to all of you online. Do a real quick introduction.
All right. Hello, my name is Molly Wheeler. I am the new director of policy at the league. Excited to work with you all.
I'm Justin Lee, director of government relations at the league.
I'm Jeff Silverstream. I'm Mayor Ramsey's butler and
Kate Bradshaw, councilman of the city.
And then in the house, Salt Lake City, Mayor.
Analyst with the league.
Abby Follett, operations and membership coordinator.
Nick Jarvis, chief operating officer with the league.
Jessica Egbert, Mapleton City Council.
Cameron Dale, director of the league.
Great.
And then Liam, will you close that door just for echo purposes?
Liam Thrakill,
Real Hill.
legislative research analyst with the league.
Okay.
Let's see, we have Mayor Kafusi.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mayor Michelle Kafusi in Provo, and are going to jump in and get up to the Capitol as soon as this is over for the LPC meeting.
Well, Mayor Kafusi, we're excited to have you as the second vice president. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's going to be a lot of fun serving with this great group of people.
Great, we have Colleen Mulvey.
Hi, Colleen Mulvey, Cedar Hills. I'm the president of the Utah Clerks Association.
And then we have Mayor Holly Gaines.
Hello, I'm happy to join the board. Brand new.
And Mayor Andy Bierman.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mayor Andy Bierman from Park City. Happy to see all the new faces.
And Gary Hill.
Hi, Gary Hill, City Manager of Bountiful City and representative from the Utah City Managers Association and on the executive board.
And Carrie Malkovich.
Carrie Malkovich, City of Woodland Hills Council member. Excited to be back for another year.
And Mayor Emily Niehaus.
Hi, everyone. This is, I guess, one of few final meetings for me. I'm going to miss all of you. As I'm not running again.
And let's see, Mayor Michelle Randall.
Good morning, Michelle Randall from St. George.
And Mayor Troy Walker.
Hi, Troy Walker from Draper City.
Great, and then we have, let's see, Meg Ryan.
Good morning, Meg Ryan with the league staff. I work on land use.
And Todd Godfrey.
Hi, everyone. Todd Godfrey, General Counsel to the League.
We also have a staff member who I had in the attendee section just promoted to panelist, but Katie Harley is joining us via Zoom as well. She is our event and strategic partnership coordinator. And I think we've hit everyone on Zoom. Yell out if I missed you. Okay.
And Mayor Ramsey, Mayor Shepherd will be joining late. He texted me that he'll be on, and then Councilmember Smith has to be excused because he's still on fall break.
It started today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. This is a great group, and we really look forward to serving with all of you this next year. The first action item we have is to adopt a meeting schedule. Let's do that first. Those of you who are here in person, it's on the back of any agenda. It's been sent out electronically. It's right there. We've got our meeting schedule for 21-22 that's being proposed. Does anybody have any Any questions or concerns? Mayor Shepherd, welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Not about LPC, but I just wanted to share that from Salt Lake City perspective, we have staff meetings every Monday morning, back to back, senior staff and chief of staff and all of that. So this is a really difficult time for me to have our board meetings at the top, beginning of the week. So I talked to Cam about that when the notice came through. It's going to be hard for me to attend. When I push those later into the week, decisions get pushed down the pipe and they come through congested for us. So this is not a good time for me. I just didn't know if anyone else starts their week with staff meetings as well.
I also normally have a staff meeting starting at 9, so I wouldn't mind moving it. I don't know if it's a little bit later works for you or what. I can't move it too late because we have council meetings on Mondays, but on every second and fourth, but not on the first.
The rationale behind doing it this way is that it would be the same day as LPC. So the people who are traveling could just block out a whole day and go, okay, whatever, we have 100 hours of this one day and get it done, right? You know, we're going to do it all in one block. So yeah, how do the rest of you feel about, is it better for everybody else to do it on both meetings on Mondays, or would you rather break it up? I mean, I don't have a problem breaking it up. I want to be convenient, but
that makes a lot of sense.
so tell me, how does everybody feel? I think, well, I want to hear what everybody thinks, you know?
I love Mondays. It's just, how long does that meeting go?
Till 11:30.
Okay, so that doesn't leave us much for LPC then.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, yeah.
This is Mayor Niehaus. What about after LPC?
We need to have ideally we'll have our board meetings before LPC, because it's up to the board to make our decisions and really decide what we're going to present to the LPC as information about what we've discussed and kind of the direction that we're looking at going. And then we get their feedback and we bring it back, but we would like to have our board meeting prior to LPC, because this is really the decision-making body.
So one other option, so during the pandemic, we bumped LPC later in the day. So we were doing board meetings during the lunch hour, LPC later in the day. We have noticed historically, we get the best LPC turnout when it's during a lunch hour. So doing the board meeting beforehand historically is what we did. We are doing hybrid meetings now, which facilitates participation. So we could do a board meeting every other, essentially in between LPCs. So every 2 weeks we would either have a board meeting or LPC, and then do a board meeting during the lunch hour. For people who do have to travel, it would mean 2 times a month, or participating remotely. So from a staff perspective, we're fine with whatever is more convenient for the board, but that would be another option.
I understand that I may be in the minority here, but I wonder if, I don't think there was a poll that I saw come through. I wonder if we told the board about what is a preference or convenient times. I'm happy to accept if I'm an outlier here and that it's just better to do it on Monday morning. I don't know that I can slow down my staff's week by pushing our staff meetings off, but I just wonder what the rest of the board wants. I actually wouldn't mind it
just having a 2-hour one Monday and then another 2-hour one the next Monday. Because I have all of my paying day gig meetings are actually starting at 10:30 Monday morning. So for me to miss a whole day Monday is actually pretty tough, even if it's only once a month. So for me, 2 hours twice a month, Monday afternoons, that's actually easier for me.
Over lunchtime-ish.
Yeah.
Mayor Danes has her hand up.
Holly, Mayor Danes.
I was just, again, I'm hoping to get to some in person, and it would be nice if I'm driving from Logan to try and catch both meetings, but I understand all the issues. It's hard to meet everyone's perfect schedule.
For my day job, this is also a fairly busy week for different reasons.
Yeah.
So breaking the meetings into 2 different days actually makes my life easier. Travel is obviously fairly easy for me.
And Mayor, what she's referencing is historically, we always do LPC the week of legislative interims. And this actually is a good opportunity for me, for new people to brief you on the board. We did a quick orientation meeting during the conference, but historically, prior to me becoming director, the board only met 4 times a year. And during those meetings, Mayor Bierman was on the board during that time. The board did not provide much direction beyond just the budget. Is that fair, Andy? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just did.
Yes. Yes, we go into much deeper detail nowadays.
Right. And so what we can do, Mayor Ramsey, what if we adopt this meeting schedule, because we're required by law to adopt it now that the new year started for us, with the caveat that we'll send a survey out to the board to identify if it makes sense, basically what's more convenient for the board. In the morning of LPC, we're doing the every other Monday, which would then facilitate a lunch hour, which could help people participate during the lunch hour rather than during their work days for those who are part-time elected officials. So we can get that survey out this week, and then with the caveat, this is the schedule, but we'll make any adjustments
Very
this week
subject
if
to change.
necessary.
Yeah.
Does that work?
And I'm good with that. Everybody feel good about that? And then it'll give everyone, we do want to hear from all of you. So when that survey comes, please fill it out and let us know. Monday all day better for you? Are you good? Can we do Monday, twice a month? That works for me too. So let us know, fill it out, and then we'll see how it comes back. But that being said, because by law, we are required to adopt a meeting schedule, can I get a motion to approve this with the understanding of what we're doing actually going forward?
As Jeff Silverstone, I will move to adopt the 2021-2022 board meeting schedule with the understanding that we'll revisit that.
A second. Who was the second? Oh, thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. And I'm just going to ask, who keeps track of that?
We do, yeah.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay, because I always make my own notes, but if somebody's officially the one keeping track, that's good to know. Thank you.
If I interrupt and say, who seconded that?
Okay, good.
We'll know.
Appreciate that. Just making sure this first time around that I'm running this meeting, that all of our bases are covered, right? We have the right things happening. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt this meeting schedule. And we've had a discussion, so rather than call for discussion, I'll just call for a vote with the understanding that we are going to send you a survey this week. That being said, all in favor of adopting this meeting schedule, knowing that it's very subject to change, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. Please watch for that survey this week. We'll do whatever works for the majority is how we'll do it, okay? All right. Before we,
Watershed Council.
yeah, we're gonna jump. First, I'm actually gonna call for any conflict of interest disclosures. Does anybody have any conflict of interest that they need to share this time?
So we will ask every meeting for a particular conflict of interest with the agenda items that you see. We've also included, since we have a new board, the annual conflict of interest disclosure form that employees and the board fill out. We have a few paper copies here for those who are with us, want to fill that out, just hand those in to me, and then we're good.
Great, thank you. Yep, we will call for those every time. So please don't be alarmed if every time we're asking if you have conflict of interest. So we're just going to ask every time. All right, we're going to move to item 3.
This is Dawn, this is Carrie. I was just going to ask Nick, for those of us who are online, how would you like us to send just email those, or wait till next time we'll see you? How would you like those forms?
Email is perfect, or if you print it off and hand it in next time, as long as we just get it, whatever's easiest for you. So let me know. I can also send a Word version to folks who prefer that. That can also get a little weird with the formatting, but just as long as you fill it out and get it in, we're all set.
Thank you. Good question, Carrie. Thank you. All right, item 3, we're going to talk about water. We have Utah Watershed Council that we're going to have Justin talk about first, right?
Okay, yes, thank you, Mayor.
Great.
So for those of you who were at our board meeting at the convention, at the conference, we mentioned that we needed someone to be appointed to what's called the Utah Watershed Council. And if you remember, and if you're new, I apologize. The Utah Watershed Council is a somewhat poorly defined entity because it is brand new. And until they get the board members, they don't decide a lot of things about what the board actually does. The general idea is there are multiple watershed councils, regional watershed councils in the state, and there will be a Utah Watershed Council that coordinates with those different things, looks at watershed issues, Again, I apologize, I can't give you a lot more detail than that because, again, until the board is created, they don't decide what they do. But under the statute, the League of Cities and Towns does appoint someone to the board. So we've asked for people who volunteered, people who are interested in that. And we had a handful of people reach out, put in their names. And as we reviewed our suggestion for the board is that Mark Stratford, Deputy Attorney up in Ogden, you know, Mark, he's an expert on water issues. He's kind of Mr. Water, knows all the answers to water things, would be a great resource, not just as a representative from the league, but would be a great resource to the board as someone who could come into that watershed council, bring immediate expertise, lend legal expertise on the issues. So that's our suggestion to you as the board, is that we appoint Mark Stratford as our appointee for the league's position.
Great. Appreciate that. And appreciate his willingness if he's appointed to serve in that capacity. That's really great. Okay, any discussion on this?
I move that we approve Mark Stratton.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Joe Silverstein, I'll second it.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve Mark Stratford as the Utah League of Cities and Towns, Utah Watershed Council representative. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, will you please give him our congratulations and
I
our
will.
gratitude?
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. All right, we also have Joint Highway Committee. Are you taking that as well?
I don't
No,
know.
I'm gonna take that.
All right.
I'm gonna excuse Justin for a period of time here. There's a Capitol Hill meeting that he needs to attend on behalf of the league. I just forwarded you this.
I saw it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, Joint Highway Committee, we have multiple vacancies that have opened up this year, just in recent weeks. We don't have names yet for you on that one, but we will for the next meeting. So we can just go straight to board vacancies.
Okay, thank you. Board vacancies are 2021 nominations committee recommendations. We have Mayor Jeff Silvestrini here, our first vice president, and we're going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I'm not sure we are on the area town representative, but with respect to area 8, given that Mayor Niehaus unfortunately is not running again, we need a representative from that area. And I will say that I understand, I let Mayor Niehaus speak for herself, but I believe that she supports the nomination of Logan Monson to fill her seat when she is no longer a member of the board. And as part of our interviewing process for the new board members, we did interview Logan, and we basically, the committee recommends that we nominate him to fill that position. It's kind of a thing where we were kind of like going back and forth, looking at what was going to likely happen, and we thought he would be the perfect person to fill that seat, and I think Landon would be a good representative to have on the board. So on this town representative, I don't know, Cameron. If you have a chance.
I can take that one. So Mayor Castleton is also not running for re-election, and his board term, like Mayor Niehaus, expires next September. So we're in the process of seeking a town representative. Who also, in Mayor Castleton's case, he represents Central Utah, and we're required to have someone from Central Utah. So he checks 2 boxes. We're waiting until after the municipal election to see who's going to be in office, and then we will recruit someone to hopefully bring to you for your ratification in December. But with Mayor Monson, well, soon to be Mayor Monson, he's running for mayor of Blanding. And he's willing to serve. He's running unopposed in Blanding, and Mayor Niehaus has recommended that he take her place starting in January. And I've met with him since the board, or since the convention, and he's very excited.
So do we need to take a formal action on this? Do we vote on this?
No.
Yes, so the board fills any midterm or mid vacancies that pop up. He will not be a voting board member, but the board can take action now to say, like it says in the memo, that when that happens, he will be the board member. That way we don't take the action in January, but the board does have to take action to appoint him to that spot.
In my conversation, I had a conversation with him at the convention as well, and I would love to, if the board has a sense that he's the person to replace Mayor Niehaus on the board, I think it would be smart to invite Logan to participate with us until that happens, so that he gets familiar with this and hits the ground running.
I was gonna say the same thing.
Yeah, that's good. He came over toward the end of our conference meeting, he introduced himself to me. I got to meet him and visit with him for just a little while too. He actually lives next door to my aunt and uncle, apparently. It's a small world. It's a very small world. He asked me how I'm related to somebody, and I said, that's my brother. So it's a really small world. Anyway, I would really love to make a motion that Mayor Niehaus cannot go. I don't know how anyone's gonna replace him someday. I'm like, you know, if I had my say, I'd make that motion. Yeah. So Emily, we're gonna miss you here. That being said, can I get a motion to approve? Is there a motion to approve Logan Monson, the uncontested candidate for mayor in Blanding, to the board for the Area 8 pending vacancy once the election?
Once he wins the election and once Mayor Niehaus.
This is Mayor Niehaus. I'd like to make that motion.
I'll second it then.
Okay, we have a motion by Mayor Niehaus and a second by Carrie. Carrie, was that you?
Yep.
Yes, okay, great. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right. Well, congratulate Logan Monson.
Thanks, and sorry for being a pain in the butt.
Well, we're not gonna pretend you're not. We hate that you're leaving, just so you know. But no, we're excited for the great things ahead in your future. It'll be fun to see what you do, but we will miss you here. Thank you. Okay, item 5. Advocacy, engagement, and outreach update. We're gonna turn to Cam. There's lots going on, so Cam, take it away.
I'm going to turn back to you in a moment. Mayor Ramsey, as you know, is your appointment to the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. And I think if I'm keeping words in your mouth, you're both grateful and I'm trying to figure out the proper diplomatic adjective that is similar to frustrated based on the busy summer with this commission. Thank you for your willingness to serve and represent all cities on this. I'm going to take a couple of moments, since we have some new board members, to make sure we're all on the same page about what the board did last month and then what has happened since, because we need some additional direction from this body as we continue negotiating within the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission around the ability of local governments to utilize economic development incentives that involve retail. Okay. Nick, I'll share my screen in a moment, but for now, will you just continue sharing your screen and just show the 2 documents that we shared in the board packet? So first, this is what we called the league approach. The league board in August had a discussion, kind of a high-level discussion about what we wanted to accomplish in the area of retail incentives. We also discussed that at LPC, then we met with multiple cities around the state getting feedback. That coalesced around the approach we brought to the league board at the September board meeting during the annual convention. And just leave it there, just leave it there. The main nexus, or the main thrust of our approach on retail incentives is highlighted in orange. That essentially there would be no direct support for big box retail or equivalent. The cities would not be able to provide direct support, which we defined as rebates or offsets directly given to a developer or a tenant to locate or relocate. Indirect support would still be allowed for big box retail or equivalent, infrastructure being a critical component of the definition of indirect support. And then incentives, direct support, indirect support would be available for non-big box related retail. So we're really trying to distinguish between big box or equivalent and other types of retail, and then direct support versus indirect support. So as those of you who were there in September, we had a pretty vigorous discussion as a board, ultimately adopted this as our approach so that the following week we could take this to the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. Their starting point proposal was just to eliminate retail incentives altogether. That's where the governor and House leadership in particular wanted to go. And so this was our attempt to say, let's focus in on what we want to emphasize without creating unintended consequences. And then this document, page 2 and part of page 3 in this document, listed all of the ways that cities do retail incentives that are not quote unquote enticements, but are about placemaking and community building and don't fit into that narrative of city versus city competition for big boxes, which seem to be the focus of the governor and House leadership. Okay, so Nick, go to the next document. So that's what we proposed what day is today, the 18th? So that's what we proposed on October 5th, the week after the conference. Mayor Ramsey and I presented that to the subgroup of the UEOC. Representative Schultz is the chair of that subgroup. He thought our proposal was still too broad. So this was the proposal that he put together in consultation with that subgroup. Mayor Ramsey and I serve on that subgroup along with Lehigh's Economic Development Director, Marlon Eldred. So this is what Representative Schultz, yes, Mayor Daines, their original proposal contemplates any sort of city revenue stream. So this is what Representative Schultz took to the full UEOC on Wednesday, October 6th. So you can see within the bullet points, there are several exceptions that had their roots in our approach and things that we have brought forward. But they're still starting with the framework of no quote unquote retail incentives unless you meet certain exceptions. So that was Wednesday, October 6th. The governor was very supportive of this. I testified to say there was still a lot of work that needed to be done on this concept, that this concept was better than the starting point, but there was still a lot of work that needed to be done. The request from the UEOC was to come back, quote unquote, angel in the architecture and come back with more specifics by the time they next meet on election day, Tuesday, November 2nd. Okay, Nick, you can stop sharing your screen. And now I'm going to share my screen. Because what we've done internally is we created what we've called our compare and contrast document of what was in our approach versus what is in the UEOC. Oh, lovely. Give my antiquated computer a second here to think through. There we go. Start again here. So we created an internal compare and contrast of what's in and what's out. I want to thank, okay, that's not the right one. I want to thank Salt Lake City in particular. We spent a lot of time with your economic development staff. No, I've got it. It just, my computer froze. So now, yeah, no, I got it. It's right here. It just, my computer froze as I was trying to share that. Yeah, there we go. We've actually used Mayor Mendenhall specific illustrations of economic development projects in Salt Lake City that we think are not enticements for purposes of sales tax revenue, but are community building in the Granary District or in Rose Park and other places. We've met with economic development people from Lehigh to Mill Creek, from St. George to South Jordan, trying to bring illustrations back to the UEOC of what their proposal could mean to communities. So in this quick document, that, yeah, Councilmember Malkovich, this is not in your packet because I wrote it last night, but it was an effort to take the two documents that you've seen and bring them together so that you can give us a little more specific direction of where we go next. So the first section here is just, what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to eliminate the argument of city versus city competition, particularly on big boxes, avoid a 50-50 battle. That's actually also where this started, is the UEOC wanted to change the 50-50 distribution for local option to 100%. Well, I shouldn't say to 100% population, but to a greater emphasis on population, which creates winners and losers within the league. I did a comprehensive presentation to the UEOC subgroup at the end of August, explaining how devastating that would be to many communities without getting any real change in outcome, any change in land use outcome, because that's the argument. Change 50-50, cities will zone for more housing, and our presentation demonstrated that that would not be the case. Recognizing the one-size-fits-all state policy, that we don't want to inadvertently take away tools from Wasatch choice implementation and mixed-use development, and to preserve placemaking tools. One illustration I've been using all summer has been that Brigham City spends about $1 million a year to incentivize Main Street businesses to clean up their windows and properties and facades to create the placemaking in downtown Brigham City. Not about enticement for sales tax or property tax revenue, all about placemaking. And the original starting point proposal would have prohibited that. Okay, next, the governor has been really hammering home the need to eliminate or severely restrict incentives of any kind. The argument we keep hearing is we need transformative policy in economic development. And as a result, the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity has scaled back their incentive program considerably. We also keep hearing this argument, retail is not an economic driver, but a follower, so there's no need for any government to incentivize it. Also a concern that we're just using public dollars to add to the return on investment for commercial developers or retailers, but is open to tying housing, actually not just open, really like the idea of tying housing to retail incentives like you see in mixed use developments. You can see, Representative Schultz has an overlap with the governor, though I'd say, whereas the governor's focus really is on just changing incentives from an economic development perspective, House leadership has been focused on zoning and housing and the mix of retail and housing, and the concern that cities are planning for excessive amounts of retail at the expense of planning for housing. The Senate has been very, very quiet. We've had multiple meetings with Senate leadership, and they have at times they'll tell us that they are comfortable with the direction of the UEOC, and other times they'll tell us they're uncomfortable with the direction of the UEOC, but publicly they've been very quiet. Within the UEOC, most of the UEOC members have raised concerns about incentives and they all endorsed the Representative Schultz proposal that we put up there because they would prefer just to see an elimination of incentives, though there has been some support around connecting incentives with housing and supporting placemaking initiatives. I put this quote in from Marlon Eldred because I thought it summarized the board position really nicely. He actually said this prior to you taking your position. Even the playing field on big boxes and car dealerships, but if you're trying to develop or redevelop an area where grocery stores needed, it accomplishes a broader policy goal, then why should the state prohibit that? The good news is we still have terrific dialogue. The UEOC subgroup does not include developers or retailers, but it does include us. And so we've spent a considerable amount of time over the last few months on this. So that leads to where we need the direction from the board for the next few minutes. We'll also ask for feedback at LPC later today. The approach that you adopted last month did not define big box or equivalent. That was intentional. We were trying just to focus on the concept. So objectives and guardrails over, what is a big box versus other types of retail. Like the second piece is around the definition of incentives, specifically infrastructure. At the board meeting last month, we talked about the need to preserve infrastructure tools, but we did not get into much detail. And now in our negotiations with the UEOC, we're very much in the detail of what is infrastructure, what isn't infrastructure. And then the sliding scale around the housing concept of tying housing to retail incentives. So for example, what they have suggested conceptually is if you meet a certain threshold of housing within the project area within the development, then all the retail incentives that currently are available would still be yours to use. If you don't have housing within that development, then the tool would be limited. So you can see how in certain circumstances where you have a project area that's a mixed use area, that's really enticing. But in other areas that just may not work. So up here I've highlighted the big box equivalent. I've referenced that several times. Definition of incentives, direct enticement versus indirect. That was the approach we proposed. Their approach is still start with the full ban and then list some potential exceptions. I actually think on the exception side, we're in the same ballpark on most of those placemaking type exceptions. Where it's tricky is whether you start with the full ban or if you just focus it directly on the big box or equivalent. Definition of infrastructure, on-site versus off-site, system improvements versus project improvements, or what I've highlighted here in letter C is kind of a combination of A and B, direct benefit to the developer or tenant versus a broader benefit or public purpose. Let me illustrate what what this means, because these are some real world examples we've been grappling with over the last few weeks. So if you have let's just call it a big box. If you have a big box that is interested in coming to Cameron City, and that big box needs a 2-inch water pipe to service their facility, the city requires them to build an 8-inch water pipe to service a larger portion of the city beyond just that big box. Some cities will reimburse that developer for 6 inches of the 8. In other words, the developer is still responsible for their 2. Other cities currently will reimburse for the entire 8. Either way, that 8 inches serves a broader purpose, but the UEOC has been focused on saying we shouldn't be subsidizing that 2 for the retailer. Retailer should be on their own for that too. Another example that's come up is of on-site versus off-site is sometimes on the on-site property, the city will require the retention, stormwater retention basin that services properties up and down the street, but it's on-site on their property. So again, there's a broader public purpose there with that infrastructure. We don't want to lose the ability to incentivize or require that. On the housing piece, one thing that's come up a lot has been whether there should be a kind of standard threshold for housing for the entire state, or if the threshold should vary depending on whether it's a redevelopment area or a veteran community that is just starting to see commercial growth. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you because I wanted to give you the broad perspective of all these moving pieces. We do want to have discussions on the definitions on the definition of retail and definitions of incentives and infrastructure and on housing, because these are really the big buckets that are in the focus of the current deliberation. The last thing I'm going to share, just to give people a sense of context here, is what, a big box means different things to different folks. So again, here are the 6 buckets. The top 4 are the ones we want to get some direction on. But this gives you a sense of what different size big boxes could look like. A Walmart Supercenter is 250,000 square feet. A Home Depot on average is 125,000 square feet. Your large supermarket, 40,000. Chain drugstore, 13,000. Main Street retailer, 2,000 square feet. What the UEOC has asked us to do is, since we propose distinguishing between big box or equivalent and other types of retail, was to come back with a definition of what that could be. The number that they proposed internally was 20,000, which would, as you can see, would be half the size of a quote unquote large supermarket. Okay, that's the background. I'll stop sharing this and go back to those. Actually, I'll just do this so you see the key questions here. Let's start with the definition of retail. Thoughts? Mayor Ramsey stepped out, so I'll look for hands either in person or on the call. So let's go. Mayor Mendenhall, Councilmember Bradshaw, and then Councilmember Malkovich.
Thanks for working with us, and I know that my team's been giving you a lot of tangible examples. I think that we need to focus on better defining from Schultz's current language what that difference is between the big box and small retailer as it's drafted right now. If with all the good work that you all have done and hopefully Salt Lake City helping, it's not reflecting what we need to see. It would completely kill our commercial loan program in all of our redevelopment project areas for Salt Lake City. So Fisher Brewery, TF, Red Iguana 2, Central 9, where we have Lizzie's and all of these dead. We would not be able to loan on any of these adaptive reuses. And I'm even wondering if it's just about square footage, Cam, when that's a great, really, it's a helpful slide about what big box can look like. But I also think that we're going to be seeing proposals of adaptive reuse of big box footprints for beneficial projects in cities, whether that's housing, small business incubators, tech labs. There's all sorts of ways that I think the square footage could be too limiting, actually. We might, but anyway, at this point, with all all of the good things that have been brought forward, the legislative language isn't reflecting it. And it would kill our small local business commercial loan program for the capital city, all the placemaking out the window.
So the name of that program is the commercial, just to make sure we got it correct.
The commercial loan program for redevelopment project areas, it's the RDA's commercial loan program.
Yeah, we have to have some flexibility. I'm sorry. you mentioned.
Well, I just want to ask a clarifying question. It seemed like from your presentation, since I've been engaged in those discussions, that the House side was open to some, or not related to grocery stores. I understand that grocery stores located of housing developments. There have been creative ways in Utah code to carve out not using square footage line in the sand, but using percentages of different types of sales as what draws that line in the sand. For instance, there's a section of code dealing with vape shops versus convenience stores. It was creatively inserted several years ago. And the way that a convenience store is defined is a 3-part test versus a vape shop in order to show that they're two very different things. So if food is a component that needs to stay in, there might be ways to look at a big box that is a grocery store with food sales differently than a big box that does not have a significant percentage of food sales.
I would say my take on that is that there's potential willingness to consider that on the House leadership side. We're not there yet. This is such important work, and I'll tell you, the only one really going into the weeds is Cam. It's us. We're the ones going into the weeds because it's just a blanket. There's no more incentives for anything. That's the end of the discussion. Put a period right there, make it law. That is the proposal. That's what they want. That's what they are still working toward. And none of these details have been maybe adequately considered and flushed out. And so it is the work of this body and Cam and his team working so hard to say, okay, but there's all these things. There's so many things. And what's been reported back is even with such important information, the response has been, well, yeah, but you know, it's up to me and I'm only one vote, but Representative Schultz is a powerful vote as the chair of that subcommittee. If it were up to me, we'd still have across the board. We'd just still have them. So we're making, actually made a lot of progress from where we started with the original proposals. But as far as carve outs on the retail incentive, it's still very much a work in progress that we're going to have to take every direction we can. But I don't know that I would be confident saying that they're open to, that they're good with food carve outs. I wouldn't call it good with food carve outs, but we're making headway and making it maybe.
No, but before we go to Councilmember Malkovich, Councilmember Bradshaw, I'm glad you brought that piece up because they have been focused on square footage and trying to pivot to other types of use, I think could help continue to reframe the conversation. Mayor Mendenhall, I used the Fisher Brewery as a specific example in multiple meetings and the adaptive reuse of that building. And my understanding is there was $100,000 of RDA funds that then facilitated the anchor of this neighborhood. And we have been referring to that as an unintended consequence of the sweeping policy proposal change. But I had somebody say to me last week, it's not an unintended consequence, it's just a consequence. And we don't think we should be doing this because we need transformative change.
Let's not use a beer example, which resonates more with Salt Lake.
Right.
But they like red iguana.
Yeah.
Red iguana too.
Yep.
That would be the same tool.
Well, you have to look at.
So Councilmember Malkovich, we said would be next, and then Mayor Ramsey, you can have it back because I was trying to conduct.
Right.
that while you're done.
One of the things that I'm concerned about is off of the Wasatch Front, what does retail mean? We have, I mean, I think about, we have large manufacturing components, which would, in a larger area would be an industrial area and might not have retail component, but in our more rural areas, a large manufacturing might have a front end that does have a retail component to it for the space. And the same with our agriculture. We have large agriculture facilities that have now started doing agritourism, as well as farmer markets, as well as other things that sell retail and have retail space. So how would we distinguish those that that only have a small portion retail but have a large facility?
Actually, Councilmember Malkovich, I brought up a similar example about farmers markets, but I was using an indoor farmers market as an example. The cities around the country have done this, and several are looking at that here. And the response back was, I was using actually an example of an old retail or an old railroad depot, which is very large, turning into an outdoor farmers market or an indoor farmers market year round. And the response back was, put some housing in it, and then you can still use your tools.
Have they been in our train station?
Right.
So what happens? So I guess what my point is too, is whether it's the manufacturing side or the agriculture side, put housing in it. That's not always a area that can have housing. If someone has a large farm or it's in an industrial side of town, that's not really conducive to housing. So how does that play into their thought process?
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
So they're just trying to solve something that they feel is a Wasatch Front issue and not really looking at everything?
So Councilmember, one of the exceptions would be for rural Utah, and recognizing that that would not include a Woodland Hills type community. But their argument, it's a libertarian view of the economy. So philosophically, they're saying if that type of business is going to function and flourish, why does it need some sort of tax incentive or public subsidy? So it's not that they're against the use, they're just saying, should the city be subsidizing that use in some form or fashion? And
right. Well, I guess I'm not looking just for my own city. I'm looking for our whole South County here, for the cities that are involved in. And it seems to me that we're on a slippery slope because yes, we're not really looking at rural. We're not doing this. Well, in 2 years, they're going to be looking.
Yeah. So we had a couple other hands that were up.
Mayor Walker was next.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So what they're trying to say, Don, you're saying if they had their way, there'd be zero incentives for any retail of any kind.
That is correct.
Okay, and so they assume then that the retail, that all of us cities are going to go look, we love retail and we just want retail so bad, that's all we care about. The only reason we want retail is because we can offset our property tax, shortfall and pay for our public safety. So, I mean, I'm not looking for any more retail if I don't get anything out of it. So I guess the bigger question for me is the one incentive I'd like to preserve is the ability for us to share in our tax revenue. That seems to be something that we ought to be able to do if we want to invest as cities and put up with the retail store. We ought to be able to have that incentive. We did that with RC Willey and Draper. We didn't bring the other taxing entities in. We just used our portion of our, the sales tax collection, and we split it with them for a while. But we made that investment in our community. I mean, all of us do it. I mean, we do it because it brings in revenue. My real concern is on the flip side. What happened? What are they going to do about the sharing of the tax revenue? That's really where I'm the most concerned about. I mean, I think we could all say, fine, we won't give any incentives to big box retail, and we also won't make it so they can go anywhere. And then the libertarians can try and figure out where to put the big box.
Mayor Walker, I believe what you're saying is exactly what they are trying to get away from. The presentation that's been given and the pitch on this is that cities are zoning for dollars, and if we make it so that can't happen, then we're not going to have cities competing against each other. We'll use, subsidize with sales tax money here or there, makes it a level playing field. And then cities don't have to preserve land for commercial, set aside for commercial or big box development. And because they're not going to be trying to worry so much about getting the tax revenue that funds our cities. So we can focus more on housing. That is the presentation. That's the mindset that this started with. Do you agree? That's absolutely what it started with. So those of us in cities see this so very differently. And we see it different than the legislature seeing it. Some in the legislature and different than the development community is seeing it. We recognize a need for tools and for land for community use, commercial use. They want to incentivize housing and feel like we get what we incentivize. So if we stop incentivizing commercial, then we can focus more on housing. That's the presentation that came. That's what's behind this.
Before you turn it over to Mayor Daines, let me add one piece that was part of our presentation to the UEOC, and that was how Utah shapes up on our retail employees and retail square footage and other retail data points compared to other Western states, including Montana and Oregon, that don't have sales tax. And we are fairly comparable to both states. The point being, the anecdote is Utah is over retailed, but even states that don't have any sales tax and therefore don't have any quote unquote incentive to quote unquote zone for dollars, those communities still have commercial centers. They still have retail, and so we were trying to poke holes in that.
Yeah,
but to change the 50 formula.
But Cameron, they also, like in Oregon, they incentivize, they share their payroll tax revenue. I mean, it's coming somewhere, and there's, those people work. What about the incentives if they want office and jobs? What about the incentives for the office buildings? Are they willing to change the program if that's what they want? They want jobs, so office buildings are incentivized. I mean, look, there's plenty of cities that didn't want a lot of retail and they haven't gone after it, and that's fine. They have higher property tax, but not all of us are seeing the world that way. If they're going to go through this analysis, then the money's got to come from somewhere. Either we all raise our property tax, which I guess they'd probably be fine with because it doesn't really go on to them. But like those other states, I don't think that's a fair comparison, because I know in Oregon, those big centers, they're sharing their payroll tax. And so that's how they fund their city operations.
I think that's a point well taken that has been expressed by several from cities and amongst this board. The mindset coming at us is that these retailers are going to go there anyway. They're just trying to get the best deal they can, but they already know where they want to go, and they're going to come anyway, even if you don't incentivize them. And if no one can incentivize them, they're going to come anyway. And that's what's being presented. That's not my opinion. That's what's being presented to us. Let's go to Mayor Daines next.
Thank you. The one point I wanted to bring up is, could there be any differentiation between whether this is greenfield development or redevelopment? Logan has an older downtown. There are some sites that if a developer is going to do something, they need to go in, buy property. There are existing buildings, so they pay for that. They have to tear them down. They pay for that. There could be environmental mitigation, which was mentioned, and then, perhaps rebuild infrastructure. So it's a very different proposition if you're trying to, redevelop or revitalize an area versus, I'm going in on greenfield, and yeah, you can kind of just start from scratch there, and it's either. So I guess I would advocate for some differentiation if there is a redevelopment project.
Thank you for that. Just by way of information for all of you, I think that's a good point. Our friends in Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain feel the opposite, and they are, as a growing community, who are now ready to start putting in some commercial and retail, because they've got a lot of housing. They are just in the process of trying to build out a city with commercial development. They feel the exact same way that Mayor Daines just said, except about greenfield, about brand new. If it's new and we don't have it in the community, can that count? And so far, there's been a lot of pushback toward any of these proposals. I mean, a lot of these things have been proposed, and so far there's been a lot of pushback. But this is what we need to hear as we continue to formulate. I'm not sure who's next.
So let me address Mayor Daines' point too. So Mayor Daines, we've had some good success articulating the needs of historic downtowns and that type of redevelopment area. There is a general sense of frustration at the Capitol around tax increment financing in general. And Mayor Walker, this gets to your point of distinguishing between TIF financing with other taxing entities and a city financing with city dollars. We've tried to make that distinction, and thus far, they've wanted just to take the blanket approach and treat TIF and non-TIF incentives the same. Mayor Daines, on the historic downtown piece, there has been an acknowledgement that there are different challenges there. And so that was actually one of the carve outs that they put into their proposal a couple of weeks ago, even though it hasn't been defined yet, but recognizing that it is different in a historic downtown area than other types of redevelopment areas. Do we have any other hands up? If not, I'd like to summarize what I think I'm hearing on the retail piece, so we can go to the infrastructure piece. Okay, Nick, can you share your screen so they can see?
Your doc?
Yeah. So go down to the highlighted sections. So on right there. No, go down the definition of retail here. So, and then make it bigger so people in the room can see it. So at this point, we've been focusing on big box equivalent versus other types of retail. Councilor Bradshaw, I like your recommendation of rather than focusing just on the square footage, which could also have the unintended consequences on adaptive reuse, that instead focus on the actual use itself. And that's where you could say, if we could come up with a test for what is an actual big box rather than the structure of a big box, many of which are being redeveloped now for other types of uses around the state. There was actually a proposal last year that we killed quietly behind the scenes that would have essentially created a by right redevelopment of big boxes into housing. And we're seeing that type of effort around the country. And so I like that direction of trying to distinguish by the use and have square footage be a part, but not the exclusive part of that definition. So any other thoughts on that piece, on the retail piece, before we go to the infrastructure piece?
I can tell you where the definition is for the C-store vape issue if you want to. No, that is a place to study.
Love to hear.
It's in 10-8-41.6.
Impressive.
That's where they've dedicated the percentages for floor space, dedicated for food and retail, and then percentage of total receipts for food and beverage.
What I also like about this is this gets to one of the core objectives that they continue to push, which is cities are quote unquote chasing tax dollars, sales tax dollars and the like. And our response has been that you're going to have that quote unquote big box anyway. Cities with or states without sales tax have big boxes. We don't want to take away tools that facilitate good planning. And often big boxes are anchors of either new mixed use development or redevelopment for mixed use, particular grocery stores. So I like being able to better define that way. Any other thoughts on the retail definition before we jump to the incentives infrastructure piece?
Sorry, harp on. Is there any, and I'm sorry if there is and I don't know about this, but is there anything about adaptive reuse specifically in the building definitions?
The building code?
I mean, well, when we're distinguishing between what we want to allow and what I think we can all kind of understand, we want to avoid with the big box attractions competing for those tax dollars. But the adaptive reuse is, there are so many benefits to that from an infrastructure perspective and tremendous costs associated with it. That can be, that's usually what our commercial loan program is for, making these businesses fit into the infrastructure that will build the environment that's already there. So anyway, just that's the most tragic part to me of what Schultz's current language kills, is that it just requires only those who can afford to scrape and build something that probably doesn't fit the context of the placemaking in the neighborhood and the history of the place as well. Thank you for that.
I'm thinking about something that may not be a historic downtown, right? Mayor Mendenhall, but it's more like an old warehouse district where you want to keep the facades and repurpose the interior.
Yeah, like art space. It felt like.
This is exactly the discussion we needed to have, and I appreciate it. We appreciate it. And you all need to know, really quick, I'm going to soapbox, and you all need to know there were no definitions. This was just a broad sweep with no consideration of what it would actually look like. And Cam has been working tirelessly on this to try to help flush all of this out. And so none of this had been considered. So thank you all for your feedback.
Now, again, the first meeting in July started with, this committee is going to change the 50-50 formula and end all retail incentives. And so you look where we're at in October, and certainly it's better now than there, and a lot more work to go, which is why we needed more specific direction from the board here. We're going to pivot now, Nick, scan down a little, because incentives and infrastructure really do tie together. At the board meeting last month, we spent a good amount of time on infrastructure as a concept. But what we realize as we've been negotiating is we need to make sure we're all on the same page about what infrastructure, what our objectives are on our tax incentive tools around infrastructure. And I mentioned before the on-site, off-site system improvements versus project improvements, which is language from the Impact Fees Act, or the specific benefit to a broader benefit. So again, looking for your feedback and direction on what sort of infrastructure partnerships we want to accomplish and which ones we want to make sure we preserve.
I mean, clearly, we need to preserve the ability to collaborate with developers to contribute to infrastructure that benefits more than just them. Your example before, it doesn't make sense to lay a 2-inch water line and then a 6-inch water line, right? So that could be viewed as an incentive to the extent that there's a partnership there, but there has to be some built into this to ensure that we can work rationally with developers to anticipate demand on systems and do things, in a more economical way. And that may involve them, that may look like an incentive to somebody. That's how you look at it.
Do they have an idea? Do we have a better bullet point list of things that are direct versus indirect to start to build a definition around, at least pitch it, or?
Well, so that's what I was trying to do by using those first 2 bullet points. So Nick, you can scan down a little bit so you can ideally see all the infrastructure stuff. But the on-site lateral versus off-site, system versus project improvements, your system improvement, you can see I've briefly defined in there, and that comes out of the Impact Fees Act. And then what we were discussing at our board meeting in September, in their language that's in your board packet, the UEOC language, it references that you can't have support for what they termed last mile infrastructure. That term doesn't quite work either, because we all think of last mile in the transportation context, whereas they meant it as a utility term. So this Mercedes does get to the point though of where should the line be when you're partnering with a private developer on infrastructure that benefits their property versus benefits the broader properties, and how much should where should that line be? And from a state perspective, I use that 8.6 one as just a simple example, but I think we should not be reimbursing that additional 2 inches, because that is the direct benefit. But I do know that a lot of cities do that. So if that's something we still want to continue to advocate to preserve, that's what we need to know. If we're willing to look at drawing lines in that context, again, this would be the broad policy, and then you have certain exceptions where that may not work. But that's the feedback we're looking for.
And this reminds me of the prison. The state picks up a piece of land way in the there, makes a road, runs utilities to the top of the road. We want them to expand the capacity of those utilities because now all that property between I-80 and the prison is set to be developed. And you'll have to ask Lord Reed for where that landed, Cam, but this is a debate that they've been the developer on pretty recently in a tremendous way, not just a block in a city, but
Right.
the entire northern part of our northwest quadrant.
Gary? Yeah, Gary, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor Ramsey. In my opinion, if we're only talking about paying for the incremental upgrade, that's not an incentive at all. We should absolutely have the ability to do that. I really think that where we ought to draw the line is if there is a benefit to the broader community, in addition to the benefit to the development, then it ought to be allowed. I think an example, for example, is by building parking or a parking structure that benefits not only the development, but is provided for public parking, to pay for the entire cost of a storm drain that not only benefits the developer, but benefits everybody else. If it's just the incremental portion, that's not an incentive at all. There's no reason to do it at all. So I think we really ought to try and hold that line. And then on the, I agree with Marilyn Eldred's comment exactly, that if we can keep us from bidding against each other, that's not a bad thing. So I think that direct cash incentive is something that although I understand what Mayor Walker's saying, really at the end of the day hurts cities because it just pits developers, it pits cities against each other. But those are my thoughts, Mayor.
Thank you, Gary. I know this is a lot to process.
Can I ask you a
right?
quick follow-up question? Mayor Ramsey, can I ask Gary a follow-up question? I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear. So Gary, you mentioned parking structure, storm drain, something that benefits everyone. In the context of the 8-inch and being reimbursed for 6 or 8, the 6 would simply be the incremental upgrade. So are you saying too that city should still be able to reimburse that 2 inches? Because the win-win here is we're getting the full 8-inch pipe maybe faster than we otherwise would have gotten it because the developer will put it in. So you incentivize them to put it in and offset that remaining 2 inches. But because there's the broader purpose for the full 8-inch line, then we're comfortable with that, but not pay for the lateral that comes off the 8-inch line that goes directly to the property owner.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. Yep.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker.
Well, I think we should be able to do the incremental upgrades. I mean, I agree that that's not necessarily an incentive. That does help the whole community if you get the bigger, public infrastructure. But back to the point of whether we all compete with each other. Look, I mean, there are cities that made conscious efforts not to do, retail, and there are other cities that have made efforts, made big conscious efforts to do it. I'm fine if that's the way we want to go, but we've had an incentive program of, if you wanted retail and you wanted to offset your revenues that way, that's the way it's been since I've been in office, about 16 years now. If they're going to change that wholesale, we need another way then of making it, making a whole, because I mean, I've got a couple of spots left in Draper that are really perfect retail spots, but frankly, I'd rather have single family homes on them if I'm not going to get anything out of the retail. So I'm not looking to put retail there if I'm not getting anything out of it. I'll put houses there and the retail won't go there. I don't know where it'll go. It won't go anywhere else in my city, but I mean, I guess this is maybe the broader discussion. I don't understand if we want to have the retail in your community, you're willing to put up with it and you're willing to share some of your tax revenue. I mean, I guess if we're going to if the only way we can do it is tie it to the housing component, fine. But those incremental increases, like for the sewer and water, I think is fine.
Thank you, Mayor.
Nick, you scroll back up. just a teeny bit.
Anyone else have any input on this? This discussion and the input coming here and the notes that are being taken is what will be put together and formulated and presented next. And as I mentioned before, the only group getting into the weeds on really trying to define these things and differentiate them and figure out what needs to really be considered and that sweeping, you're going to cause this, is this group right here. This
That's
is
because they don't understand what we have to
the
do.
only group having this discussion, so this is what will be presented. So does anybody have anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
So what, I want to know a little more about the why. Why this angle? Why is it the 50-50 thing? Is it the city versus city thing? Is it trying to rob Peter to pay Paul to get more housing? What is actually driving this? Because I heard a little bit of housing conversation come in, but I also I think that's an aside from this. What is driving the House to be so passionate about this generic topic? And
I believe it's
Nick, will you go back to the first part of the two-pager? Because the council member, your question is really the $1 million one, or in this case, the multi-billion-dollar one. The committee started with, we're changing 50-50, and even the legislator said, Cameron, we know your members aren't gonna like this, but this is what we have to do for the good of the state. And then, of course, I said, why? And I said, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And they articulated the problem as cities are incentivized to zone for commercial and retail because you get 50% point of sale and you get a high property tax, 100% property tax, and not housing, and that exacerbates the housing crisis because you're zoning for retail instead of for housing. To which Mayor Ramsey and I both responded, well, show us the evidence that cities are over planning for commercial, because we don't have Councilmember Smith, or I don't know if we have Councilmember McKay or not, but in southwest part of Salt Lake County, the retail vacancy rate right now is 2.8%. So that says to me, we're not over planning in the southwest part of the valley, which is exploding with houses because it actually hasn't kept up, the commercial side hasn't kept up with demand there. So we went back and forth on changing 50-50, and we also proposed if you want to get to quote unquote tax equity, you need to look at property tax and say that we're going to tax everything at the same rate, whether it's housing or commercial. And the response back was, well, that would just drive up the prices of housing even more, and you shouldn't be doing that in the middle of a housing crisis. So you have the housing crisis, which is legitimate and real. You have a shortage of available houses, attainable houses, and affordable houses. Then you have the governor's approach, which is our economy is red hot. And so we need to scale back the incentives that we as government, big capital G, offer. That's state incentives for businesses and for job growth. It's local incentives for everything that we do. And so the housing and the incentives piece have kind of merged to say, okay, can we use this conversation on incentives to potentially make a difference on the problem with housing? So that's why one of the exceptions that they offered that we'll get into now is about whether cities could still use all of your existing tools so long as there was the housing component to it, and potentially solve two birds with one stone. But then if you are incentivizing currently a commercial development for whatever reason, and we've listed all the different reasons that cities incentivize housing that's separate from just maximizing the point of sale. We're trying to highlight as many of those as possible so that people see it's not just as simple as get rid of retail incentives and all of a sudden you're going to have more housing units. Instead, it's you get rid of retail incentives, it's going to have all of these impacts on placemaking and everything we do over here. It doesn't necessarily get you the outcome that you want on housing. That's been our argument on 50-50. With the housing piece, which we've highlighted, there is an acknowledgement from them that or from the other stakeholders, that if you scale back retail incentives too much, you will kill mixed-use developments. And so they've said, look, we don't want to do that. So what's the right threshold to make sure you still have housing as part of mixed-use developments? So does that help answer your question? on what the problem is they're trying to solve?
It's still the same in my brain. It's you yell at your child and tell them to stop yelling, right? So that's why I'm kind of, I accept we can't solve that at this table, but what we can do is give feedback on it. So, you know, coming from my more rural environment, we're not about to put a big box in Mapleton, but I would like to see a decent grocery store come in. And so while our income is really property tax driven, I'm trying to think, okay, the implications of this, it just takes away this freedom that we would have in our sort of more unique environment to incentivize somebody to come in on this small scale basis. What tools are you leaving us with? What can I even do for something that we need when we literally have 11,000 people that'll be tripling and we don't have a grocery store, and you're telling me I have to tie my hands depending on our definitions. And I love the recommendation about the square footage of definitions. That's a fantastic one. So it's frustrating to me because it's not necessarily these things should be connected, and we're not going to go put a bunch of condos. It's not going to happen. So I'm trying to figure out what's their why, and how do we get to their why and satisfy that while also giving us the freedom and flexibility to do with each unique city is. And I guess that's why we're here in the first place. So.
I actually brought up that point, and I did say to the commission, cities, communities want the opportunity. We as communities want the opportunity to grow and build and create the culture and the environment that we want. That's why we all chose to live where we live. And we as communities want to have the flexibility to create the communities we live in. And that was met with a response that ideologically, that, you know, that's a good philosophical idea, but we have to do what's best for the state. That was the response.
Interesting. Okay, so the last piece on this, and then we do need to get to the homelessness appropriation request, was on the housing science scale. Looks like Dr. Futsi raised her hand. So Mayor, do you want to call on her? And then I'll get to the housing piece.
Mayor Futsi.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I know every day we're dealing with this kind of stuff as well, because we're lucky. We get a little bit of the big piece and a little bit of the small piece. We get a lot of big companies coming in, but we still have folks in the neighborhoods that want the hometown feel. So the balancing act is really tricky for me as the mayor. Someone's always mad at me, which is normal, and I'm sure you all feel that pain. But my question, and I have found this, and I've really pushed my 11 directors on this, the definitions piece, and I was looking over the documents and defining, we've had to come up with our own definitions to work with our council to keep what equalifies a big box store and what defines, I mean, I know I read the document, we're going into homelessness, but what defines a homeless person? I mean, there's just a lot of this stuff that needs definitions and parameters before I even dare move on it. I know what we've got in Provo, but I know it's not statewide.
Well, yeah, I have Mayor Futsi, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think this conversation's been helpful for us because now I feel better equipped to dive into the definitions with the general policy direction from this group, both on the infrastructure piece and on the definition of retail. On the housing piece, hopefully this piece is relatively quick. Is our approach that you had adopted in September did say that as long as there was a housing component, we would still be able to use the retail incentives we have, and that's a matter of figuring out what that threshold looks like. The question then I have for this group is recognizing that all cities are in different life cycles. We're going to try to push for a sliding scale so that if you're a redeveloping city, that the housing requirements may look a little bit different in a redevelopment urban center than it does, say, in a Mapleton, and then also recognizing that some cities like a Saratoga Springs have considerable amounts of housing already, And so can they get any sort of credit for that significant amount of housing? Because right now their balance is a lot of housing, very little commercial, versus another city that may have a whole lot of commercial right now, but very little housing. So having some sort of sliding scale component there. Are people comfortable with that type of approach of the housing?
I think it's our best hope of eliminating a one size fits all. We all know that it doesn't, you know, and so if we can create a sliding scale that gives more equity to the opportunities that Salt Lake City is taking with redevelopment and in Logan, you know, and we also have these areas, you know, historic redevelopment, right? Midvale and Magna and then our growing communities and the ones that have set aside retail space because they're barely ready for it. I think a sliding scale is our best hope of something that's going to work.
That's really helpful because that just kind of speaks to that word balance. And it kind of means the same thing, right? You've got to be able to have balance, find balance with the smaller communities and their needs, all the way up to the bigger communities and their needs. So I appreciate that.
Would the sliding scale constantly reset or would it be locked in code?
Yeah, that's a good
That
question.
is a good question. There would have to be some sort of a reset or an opportunity to revisit it because as we continue to grow, conditions change.
So the model that I have in mind is part of the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity shift on their state ed tip is to say when certain economic conditions are high, the incentives are limited, but if the economy slows down, then they have more. So they actually have some benchmarks where it's flexible. So as I was reviewing that last week, I thought, well, this is actually what we should complement and build off of as well, so that there's that built-in flexibility. Because I'm thinking about, again, the Fisher Brewery, or better put, the Fisher Restaurant. You know, there's housing.
They never will. It's a food truck.
Okay, well, Red Iguana 2, you know, Red Iguana 2, that specific property may never have housing on it. But Red Iguana 2 has a bunch of housing complexes that are popping up within the area where Red Iguana 2 can serve as an anchor for that neighborhood. So trying to figure out how those pieces fit. But where they're coming from is, and to a degree us, is the implementation of Wasatch Choice and creating centers. So how do we codify that you can use retail incentives if you're trying to implement the Wasatch Choice? So I think about downtown Clearfield and all the redevelopment that's happening there. You know, you guys are the poster child for Wasatch Choice in Davis County. So, but you don't want a situation where you can't incentivize one side of the street because the housing's on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
Likewise, council member in Mapleton, you know, the historic way of developing Greenfield would be your big box with parking lot. Whereas what you're seeing in Salt Lake and Clearfield and Mill Creek and other places, it's no longer just the big box in the parking lot. It's maybe the big box and part of the parking lot's being filled in with housing or with other land uses. So, you know, that will be a mindset shift for the Mapletons of the world to plan a little differently, but that's consistent with Wasatch Choice. So we want to make sure that that's the driving value.
So Ken, the other component I think that think about it in those Go Utah incentives is we have microeconomic climates. And so you might find that you're dialing up or down those housing requirements along the Wasatch Front in a different way than you're doing it in rural Utah. And that would be really important to get built in if we're going to accept some type of a sliding scale.
Yep, good point.
Very good. Thank you. I know that we've got a long time on this and we have a lot of important things, but in my opinion, this is the most critical discussion that we have during this board meeting today that deserves the most amount of time because this is a fast moving train.
Oh, we have another meeting tomorrow.
So thank you, everyone.
My last request to the board, I'll be making this request at LPC too, is it's really helpful when I have specific examples in these meetings and where Mayor Ramsey can talk specifically about cities. So, you know, I've got quite a few pictures from Salt Lake City. Both Mayor Ramsey and I have traveled the city extensively, so we're able to fill in the blanks. But if you have specific pictures and other examples that you'd like us to bring up, because often how this dialogue goes is it starts in the ideological realm And then once we put meat on the bones, like, yeah, you're right, we don't want to harm that. Okay, well, this proposal harms that. Okay, so it helps us with those conversations with the governor's office and with House leadership.
The more cities we can include and a variety, right, of conversations, not just Salt Lake City, not just St. George, also Logan, also Midvale, also Bountiful.
So you want to collage or pictures? Would pictures be helpful?
Yep, pictures would be very helpful.
I've got a good food desert example for you with, there's lots of housing in West Mill Creek. There's no grocery store there or in South Salt Lake other than Winco, which is like great if you want to buy, 1,000 quantity things, it's not something that you can go and buy a reasonable quantity that people can afford. So I'll give you pictures of that.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. We've discussed food deserts repeatedly with this group. It has been, that one has had a really interesting response. So part of the reason their proposal includes the low income piece was to get to food deserts without saying food deserts. But we've also had people in the meeting who said, if you're incentivizing it, it's because the grocery store wouldn't be able to survive otherwise and just let the market be the market. Or if you incentivize it there, it may end up killing the grocery store that is relying on those households, and then kill that. And then you say you have a food desert, you have to incentivize it. So it just keeps going and going. So again, that's the ideology meeting the practical nature. So, but the more info and specifics we have, the better. Okay.
Yeah, when you look at what grocery stores look at in terms of income demographics and stuff like that, that's why it's so difficult to get them to locate for an area that's lower income, because the income stuff doesn't match their standard formula for where they build stores. So there has to be flexibility in that, or it isn't going to work.
Right, because even if the people don't make enough money, they still need to
That's
buy
right.
groceries.
And we're trying to solve the very problem that we have about affordability, and then that is limiting us on the other side of it. And that's why incentives can be appropriate in certain circumstances.
Thank you, everyone, for your input and your thoughts. We'll keep working on this and just stay in touch, let you know how things are going and continue to ask for feedback. Okay, let's move on.
Yep. So I'm going to ask my staff to essentially take your initial presentations and collapse them to 1 minute on the caucus review and the LPC survey results. That will help kind of set the stage for what comes next. And I think it's helpful for you as a board representing all the cities to see the feedback from the members, and it was in your board packet. So Carson, let's take 1 minute, just a couple of quick highlights. Then Molly, you take a moment to hit the highlights, and then we'll jump into the homelessness piece.
So trying to get through 2 pages in 1 minute. So you've all heard about the LPC survey at some point.
Yeah,
you can just scoop out into the actual numbers.
Yep.
Yeah, that's perfect. So you've all heard about the policy survey. What we've done is we've taken results from more than 100 cities and collapsed them down into the categories that are most relevant. You'll see the, sorry, I'm going to share it for here. So what you'll see, so again, we broke the 44 items down into 20 something items, like 22 items. And then we have the average city response, and then we have the responses from the cities that fall into different caucuses. And you'll see probably the key takeaway here is the color coding. Out of all the responses, the 44 total options, we ranked them based on the average score, and then we broke those into quartiles based on that average score. So dark green are the most comfortable within each of those breakdowns. And again, these are just selected from that 44, so you don't have an even number of dark green, green, orange, and red, but dark green are the most comfortable policy topics to discuss. Light green are the somewhat comfortable policy topics to discuss. Orange are somewhat concerned, and red are very concerned. And what you'll see is there's general consensus among the issues on either side. So very comfortable talking about technical state planning assistance, very uncomfortable talking about single family zoning prohibitions. So the reason we included this, though, is we wanted to highlight that while there is general consensus among the LPC, there are some differences based on community. The last thing I'll mention, and I don't know how many of you have looked at this or you've seen some of these results prior, but as we go into these discussions on land use, on revenue and incentives, it's helpful to know that there is not a perfect consensus between the different groups. And just that kind of highlights the need for policy that recognizes that all cities are unique and have different challenges.
Excellent. Nick, no, go back up, Nick, to the one that's entitled planning. Yeah. If you go back up a little bit, yeah, that planning one. So the right there in the middle, they're not numbered, but it's the one that has the five light orange and the one red. Requires city to have low moderate income housing component in a project to receive state economic development resources. That policy concept is actually part of the discussion of the next steps around SB 34 and moderate income housing. Carson mentioned you can see the areas where there's considerable consensus on support. Go down to the next page, Nick. Then on this one, we just spent a lot of time talking about that middle one. Indian state authorizes city incentives for retail as long as it's accompanied by mixed use housing, job center development. So you can see that one again, it's kind of squarely in the middle. We had members on all sides. So we are using these survey results broken down by caucus to help inform us as we're working on proposals. So, and then we wanted to make sure you as board members saw them since you represent the members. So any questions about the survey results before I turn it to Molly to talk about the caucus feedback on these topics?
Just Cam, those are the two that you pointed out. So are they the two shockers kind of to you, or the ones that are going to be the trickiest to manage?
So those are the two where we are neck deep in policy deliberation right now. So,
okay.
The membership seems pretty evenly divided on these two, which again is why we're coming back to the board to make sure we're getting direction from you on top of the survey results. We weren't really surprised by these results, but I think it's helpful to reinforce that our members are willing to storm the castle to fight changes to the 50-50. But interestingly, Mayor Kafusi, in the previous one, can go back up to planning real quick, Nick. We were actually pleasantly surprised that when we tested state incentives for cities to allow more density in any type of zone, those all scored positively with one minor exception. So if it's an incentive-based system, generally speaking, our folks were comfortable with it. If it was a requirement, our folks were opposed. So then that leads to the question, what's an incentive versus what's a requirement? And that's been the focus of this summer, is trying to define those two. And at LPC, we'll be talking about moderate income housing plans and trying to define incentives versus requirements. That's actually, it was a big focus of caucus meetings. So Molly, you want to take a moment to summarize that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say one overwhelming kind of umbrella theme within the housing conversation was that preference towards incentivizing the housing policy we want to see, rather than a lot of cities kind of felt like the state was implementing pretty draconian statewide policies that were kind of targeted at maybe punishing a specific city for their policies, but kind of caught everyone in the crossfire. So within those caucus meetings, we had 5 groups: the Rapid Growth Caucus, established mid-size, resort, traditional, rural, and then first and second class cities. And we talked with them about 2 topics, housing and water. I don't think anything that came up is really going to surprise anyone, but they were just kind of common themes statewide that took place within these individual caucuses. So the first 2 points really surround density. The first being that largely density is not associated with affordability. And just because you create density does not mean you will create affordable housing within any of our cities, unless you are also willing to tackle other policy issues. Wages came up, for example, in a couple of our caucus meetings as well. And then looking at the negative perceptions of density and looking at how we can shift some of these conversations to looking at more missing middle housing, which is more palatable and a little more aesthetically pleasing, as well as looking at it as, housing for your children and housing for your grandchildren so that they can stay in our communities. Others then also said that we're really being aggressive with housing, felt like they were kind of absorbing the consequences of their neighboring cities not implementing affordable housing policies. So, why should Molly City do anything when Cameron City is already implementing this? If people want affordable housing, they can do it to Cameron City, right? The others, and this ties in with our retail conversation as well. The more people we have, it's not just housing, right? It's a higher demand on our schools, our churches, our grocery stores, and other retail opportunities. Others with the private sector, issues with the supply chain and inflation. It's really difficult to address the public policy implications of the private sector influx in cost. And then again, placemaking, how do we incorporate housing while also maintaining this sense of place, right? If we are a farming community, how do we maintain that sense of agriculture and farming and ranching while also incorporating more housing? And then the short-term rentals, right? They're really difficult to regulate and they also exacerbate the demand on our existing units. So those were the common themes that came up with housing. And then within water, landscape was a pretty common theme. One frustration was what is kind of the aesthetic line between conservation and negligence within domestic lines. Kate, I know in I was with Kate, big thing was also the tattletaling, like, well, they're watering when they shouldn't be, or anything like that. The citizen justice within that.
Citizens arrest.
Yeah, citizens arrest. A lot of municipalities are partnering with their local water districts to require new developments to implement water-wise landscaping, and then really trying to encourage existing HOAs and developments to create ordinances and standards that are more water-wise, and then where possible, promoting filter stripped or buyback, anything like that. Secondary water is another interesting one, looking at tiered billing, implementing metering in new places as possible, and then some restricted use. Municipalities that did provide water intensive features like splash pads were kind of cutting back where those were available. Cities are interested in advanced metering to catch leaks so that those can be mitigated. But then again, that's something where it's a lot cheaper to implement in new development rather than retrofit back. And then education, right? What are the conservation opportunities that we can be giving our residents, and also how much they can understand how much water they're actually using and the cost structure of that water. And then within the rural caucus, water rights was a big issue where they felt like folks were really just taking whatever water they wanted or needed and not necessarily the water that they were allocated within their rights.
Perfect. So we thank you, Molly, for assembling all that caucus data. We will be spending time at LPC on the land use and water piece, so we're not going to talk about that at the board level. We'll do that at the LPC level. But hopefully that gives you just a good sense of how your colleagues are feeling around the state. And this also is consistent with the strategic goals that the board set for us years ago, but improving our membership engagement on the advocacy side and using different tools to get that insight. So with that being said, let's jump into homelessness. I told Mayor Ramsey I can do the last agenda item in 2 minutes, so we can use some of that.
Can I just add one quick thing for Molly on the water issues? We had conservation and negligence. As a talking point, in case this goes anywhere further, I would like to include also public safety. We had to encourage to balance between conservation and safety, because we live in a city that has a high fire danger. And so it's not just the two. There's also some public safety in there.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know. Same. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember. Okay. So I'm sharing my screen here as we jump into the last key policy item, homelessness, and we can go a couple minutes over if necessary too here. Okay. So there are several potential funding requests that the league can support. As a reminder, we don't engage in city-specific appropriations, but the last couple of years, the board has taken positions on general appropriations that benefit cities collectively. One such request, based on the survey results, there was the number one result was more technical assistance to implement land use ordinances. So that we will be making that ask based on the survey results. There will be gubernatorial-led air quality initiatives that are consistent with the league resolution on air quality that will be presented at tomorrow's air caucus. Will be there. UDOT has reached out about next steps on the road usage charge. We'll have meetings this week on that. And then I already mentioned the opioid settlement issue that our folks were discussing and negotiating this morning. This board last month, for those of you who are new, approved an appropriation request of $5 million into the homelessness mitigation fund. As a reminder, every city that does not have a homeless resource center contributes a portion of sales tax into the mitigation fund. Last year, cities contributed about 5.3 million. Molly's actually gone through and broken down every city's contribution, so we have that data. The reimbursement requests in 2020 were about $7 million from the 5 cities that house shelters. And that was with St. George and Salt Lake City, both requesting a fraction of what they could have requested. President Niederhauser spoke to this board in August and said he was supportive of expanding the mitigation fund, wanted to see more parity in the mitigation fund, potentially minimum amounts for all 5 cities, not just Mid-Mill and South Salt Lake. Representative Johnson from Cache Valley has a bill file open that we've been working with him on that could address this participation match concept that we've discussed. Again, quick reminder on this one, you see a couple of examples up here. Right now, if Cameron City doesn't house a shelter, Cameron City cuts a check based on Cameron City's population. But if Cameron City were to say, if the city were to permit an overflow shelter for the winter, then the city's mitigation contribution would be reduced or eliminated for that year. So again, it's an incentive to try to help cities who don't have homeless resource centers do other meaningful items that could reduce homelessness and see a benefit within the mitigation fund. Now, what we don't want to have happen is for South Salt Lake, Midvale, St. George, Ogden, and Salt Lake City to not have sufficient money in the mitigation fund. So if every city were to do a participation match, that leaves no money in the fund. So that math equation is a tricky one. That's where the additional state dollars would be very helpful to expand the pool, expand the pie, and then allow for that participation match. We've had a subgroup of cities that have been working on these different participation match concepts with DWS. So then that leads.
So Cameron, I
go ahead, Mark.
say that we did get in the weeds on more on that in terms of cities that might have a temporary shelter or something like that being relieved from their contribution. Because I'll just say, I mean, I would love to have that be retroactive because we did that last year, but we had no impact. So you have to look at, is there an impact as a result of that as well? Because I don't think it would be right for us to not have paid the contribution.
To
given
forego
we
that
had
donation if it
zero
wasn't an additional
impact.
impact.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So right now we are trying to put meat on the bones of what that participation match would look like, and also who would make the decision. One idea we've had has been that the local homeless coordinating council and the state homelessness council would have to approve it. That way you make sure you have a connection between the participation match, the cities that have the homeless resource centers, and the service providers. So it's not just happening in a vacuum. But focus for the next few minutes here is on the second request. So you approved the 5 million request last meeting. President Niederhauser, it's in your packet, also has 200 million of requests. We wanted to give you some context about how state ARPA dollars are being allocated. So they still have ballpark 500 million of unallocated money from their first tranche, okay, that they will be allocating in the next few weeks. 50 million of that went to the local match. There were over $1 billion worth of requests from 445 jurisdictions. They put 35 million in the commercial rezone. State drinking water is looking at some. We met with Salt Lake County last week. They're looking at using some county ARPA dollars to partner with cities around water conservation and both from a PR perspective and from a technical perspective. So that's separate from state dollars, but just within the state ARPA dollars that impact cities, you have homelessness, deeply affordable housing, local match, commercial rezone, state drinking water, okay? The other thing I highlighted in orange on this slide, MAHP plus eligibility for future dollars. This actually came out of the caucus meetings that there seemed to be support for the idea that for the local match, if it gets funded at a higher level next year, that cities would have to be compliant with moderate income housing plans to qualify for those dollars. That would be a way to help sift down from 445 applications and disqualify communities that aren't planning for moderate income housing. Okay, so that is based on the survey results. That's been something that we've proactively proposed for the local match going forward. We have not publicly proposed that. That's just been in discussions behind the scenes. So basically speak now or hold your peace if you're concerned about that type of approach with the local match. Mayor Kafusi, were you raising your hand?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. The additional dollars that was in your packet was the 200 million for homelessness and deeply affordable housing. It would be targeting new units that the market otherwise would not build, or would need additional incentive support to build, focusing on not just moderate income folks, but truly low income for folks, 40% area median income and below, with special consideration given to the integration with transportation. Mayor Mendenhall.
Define focus.
That was the
Are you
term.
mean prioritizing or exclusively for 40%?
It's not exclusive. So 40% is the primary focus, but the secondary focus was it could be higher depending on the micro market. So for example, Park City if Park City were to have some of these units in Park City, they may not be at 40%. It could go up to 60% under President Niederhauser's proposal because your costs are still high up there, but the primary focus would be 40% with some flexibility.
Isn't there a 100 split on the?
Yeah, so I combined the 200 million because they were in the same appropriation request, but you're right, there's 100 million and 100 million. And there's actually, since I put this together, there's another 100 million requests. There's a lot of requests going for these ARPA dollars. And so my focus with the board today is actually less about the dollar amount and more about the concept of the request. Because if we're supportive of the concept of the request, then we can relay that back to President Niederhauser. But recognizing we may be sending a letter to the governor and to the legislature saying, we want you to spend your ARPA dollars on local match, on homelessness, on housing. So, and if that's what we want to do, if we want to ask for all of those things, that's great. But before we just start writing kind of one-off letters for different things, we wanted to make sure we knew what you wanted to ask for. And this just quickly summarizes what's in President Niederhauser's proposal.
I have a question. It says the current affordable unit deficit in Utah is 45,000.
That's for the 40%. So that's not sorry to interrupt, but the Gardner number is 44.5, and that's the housing shortage. Coincidentally, the true affordable unit deficit is about 45,000. The reason those numbers don't quite align is you have a lot of people who are low income who are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. They may be housed right now, but they're not housed in true affordable units. So they're counted as a deficit even if they're in housing.
Okay, that was my question. I thought it was, that's exactly what I was trying to connect. Thank you.
I feel that we need to have definitions on the maximum AMI allowance. That I kind of feel like Schultz does about retail not needing incentives across the board. Housing is happening. What isn't happening is 40% and below. And I understand that there's context of micro markets that needs to be in consideration, but we should not be incentivizing 80% AMI. These dollars, our dollars shouldn't be going to 80%. That's happening. That will happen with the market. But what we're not reaching is this 40%. And at one of the 100 million proposals, I believe should be 40% and lower and restricted to that with a maximum of 40%.
Thank you, Marin. I've pulled up the screen. This is the exact appropriation language that President Niederhauser submitted.
Click that little arrow if you're trying to just get rid of that.
Yep.
What's on your side?
So this project's eligible for the fund. So individuals occupying apartments must be 40% of AMI at the time, or 50% of funds may be allocated to projects that serve individuals at under 60% if you have the need for the higher AMI. So that was the example I poorly described of Park City, but this is the exact language from the appropriation request to the governor's office.
So, sorry, I'm trying to handle it. 50% of the funds must be at 40% according to Wayne's proposal. Is that right?
So
and then the other 50% could go up to 60%?
So part A is it must be 40%, or then 50% can be allocated for higher income, low income individuals if there's that need in the community.
This is Wayne's proposal. How likely, what's the response?
The response has been positive. The Commission on Housing Affordability endorsed this, and then Wayne asked us to consider it as well based on him participating at the board meeting in August. So he sees this as absolutely critical. Again, Commission on Housing Affordability has endorsed it. So again, what I'm looking for from this board is conceptually, do we support this request? I don't know if it's necessarily going to be 200 million when it's all said and done, but do we support this concept? And then if we do, we've operated under the assumption that we also support expanding the local match, and that we support, we've already approved the mitigation dollars. So if you're comfortable supporting all of those uses of state ARPA dollars, that's great. Let's say so that we can be advocating that. But if we're going to try to prioritize and do this one and not that one, tell us that now too, because the governor's going to be finishing his budget proposal in the next few weeks.
Can I ask for maybe a clarification context, and maybe Mayor Mendenhall, several of you may know better about this than me, but just as an example, 40% of AMI, that would be, for example, a retired person living only on Social Security. Would that be 40% AMI?
I don't know what the lived income example is. Are we at about 64,000 is AMI for Salt Lake County right now?
Yeah.
I think so. Now that you say that, I think so.
That's
Okay.
for the two income household, not a single. So 40% of that is.
Okay.
26 grand.
Yeah, which is, I'm just trying to put it into real life people terms. Who are we talking about? 40% AMI. We're talking about our grandma who's living on Social Security only, right? And needs housing that they can afford to live in. Is that, I mean, there's of course
You're
far
talking
more of a
about-
demographic than that. I'm just trying to put a person.
Yeah, that would be part of it.
in
Yeah, that would be
context.
part of it. It'd also be service workers.
Right, there's
and-
a whole lot more people
Right.
that is the situation that they're in, but I'm just trying to, I was just wondering if that, that's something that maybe people can relate to when they're trying to picture, who are we talking about? We're talking about, one example might be somebody. just
Again,
living on
the scale of things is, I mean, I think we're at 108. And so when you look at what's the 40% of it.
And it would be
scales,
the
how
county
much of that
AMI.
scales, yeah.
So, and I don't know what it is in Utah
Yeah.
County. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'm supportive of this. I don't feel like we have time right now to prioritize or deprioritize any of these. Because we're out of time.
Right.
But I'm supportive of this request.
Where would you put the third 100 million?
Don't know. Yeah, I just know there's another 100 million that's been floating around as a concept. Even though the state has over $1 billion coming in ARPA dollars in the second tranche, I'd say it's probably been spent 4 times over now because everybody's turning to ARPA dollars. And so, Mayor Mendenhall, your point is a good one on the priority piece. And we could wait until November to revisit that. From a local match perspective, I'll have more details because the selection committee will have met by then. So if you'd like, we could postpone that broader conversation and simply say conceptually, we're supportive of this effort, but not take a position on the 200 million as the dollar figure.
I'm
like
super
that.
supportive of the 200 million. I guess I don't understand. Maybe it's a staff capacity thing, but why would?
It's more just a political capital thing. And if we want to ask for everything, then let's ask for everything. But if there's something we say, we don't want to spend political capital asking for that. But the local match is clearly important. There's a lot of demand for it. We've already supported the mitigation dollars, but it just comes down to the strategic goal that is in front of my mind on every issue, maximizing political capital when we're being pulled in every direction. But if they're both top priorities, then let's express that endorsement that they're both top priorities and proceed.
That works.
What do you think? I will ask if there's a motion on this. Let me just get back to it.
Yeah,
See what it is. Thank
support
you.
so the first motion would be to support the request on the deeply affordable.
Is there a motion to support this request on the deeply affordable housing and that's ARPA specific.
Yeah.
Right?
Sorry.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion to this?
Just clarification on the motion, Mayor Ramsey, it just kind of muffled.
Oh, the motion is to support the homelessness and deeply affordable housing ARPA specific use that has been presented today, that was requested by Peter Hauser.
But just to clarify, so that is only one option. Cities aren't required to do that. It just gives them the option, correct?
So, yeah, what this appropriation request does, I just realized I stopped sharing my screen, so let me just pull it up so everybody can see the summary of it. So it's the 200 million request to help facilitate the construction of these new units that are targeting low-income residents. These are the types of uses it can be on. Governments can apply, nonprofits can apply, for-profits can apply. So there's nothing that mandates a city participate. It just creates another pool so that some of these units can get built.
This isn't the league's proposal. This is the league supporting this, this proposal, this request by Wayne Meter Hauser. Any additional discussion? Anybody else have any comments, questions, concerns? Okay, I can't see anybody
No,
hardly,
it's all
so
right.
I'm going to trust that somebody can see the screen and tell me.
Yeah, nope, I think we're,
Okay, all right, seeing none, all in favor of approving the motion to support the homelessness and deeply affordable housing ARPA specific use request that came from Wayne Meter Hauser, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
so then
Thank
we
you.
could take a motion now about supporting the expansion of the local match, or if you want, we can wait until November and we can bring back the report from the selection committee.
I'd be interested to know if this state is gonna require more strings, because they're, they'd like to reach in and control how cities are spending their money, so.
So this, under federal law, they cannot require additional strings of how you actually spend the money. What they can do is the eligibility piece, which is why, based on the feedback from caucuses, we've had discussions about saying, look, you have $1 billion of applications, you've got 50 million of money. So going forward, you could say you need to be, in order to be eligible for these ARPA dollars, you have to be compliant with SB 34. And then if a city's not compliant, they're not going to be eligible, but it's not strings on how you actually use the money.
so do we want to make a motion today that we add we ask for the additional match request and to expand that program, or do you want to wait? We can do it next month, or we can do it now.
I prefer more detail after your meeting.
Yep, that's fine. That's why we brought it up.
I think that's a good idea. Okay.
Say wait.
Okay, perfect. Okay, then the executive director report, I'll do it in 1 minute. Strategic goals, I've referenced several of them through this meeting. For those of you who are new, they're at the back of your packet. Part of the reason we are advertising for a deputy director that you authorized last meeting is to help us meet those strategic goals. Membership dues update, we've received at this point over 95% of membership dues for this year. There are a couple of smaller cities and several towns that haven't yet responded. Still going back and forth with West Valley City, but cautiously optimistic that they will return.
North Ogden, one of the highest ones on there. We received email this morning that will be coming.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. So we will meet our budget projections there. So Nick's brought it up here again, working with West Valley City, and then the rest are all really small, and we're doing the follow-up. It's interesting to see the number of towns since we imposed the minimum dues for the towns. We've still generated significantly more revenue from that minimum dues from the other 80 plus towns, but we'll be following up with each of them individually.
Towns have also typically been the ones we're doing a lot of follow-up at the end here, and a lot of that's due to getting a hold of the recorder and when things are open and that sort of thing as well. So
Local Officials Day, Wednesday, January 19th. We are planning a youth component as usual. But just know, due to the Capitol's renovation and COVID, we don't have access to some of the spaces we've used in the past. So staff is working through how to accommodate, 500 kids at the Capitol when we no longer have access to the auditorium, which is where we would normally do a lot of the youth programming, but we are still planning on youth programming. Staffing update, this will be your last board meeting with Abby Bollock as our membership coordinator and operations staff. She's leaving for another opportunity next week. So we appreciate everything Abby has done over the last 5 years working here and wish her well in her next adventure. And then last but not least, elected officials essentials will be the 2 Saturdays in December and January. One is a partnership with Utah State, so we're broadcasting around the state. And then the other will be at the local government trust. This is where we try to catch everybody who's new and introduce them to the league and engage them in the organization. So there is no obligation for board members to attend those 2 Saturdays. It's for information purposes. We're also working out an event in early December with Mayor Shepherd and Mayor Ramsey to host newly elected mayors in northern Utah with the speaker and the president at Clearfield City Hall to have a meet and greet and engagement opportunities. Mayor Shepherd, thank you for hosting that at Clearfield. We're excited about that. Okay, Mayor Ramsey, that's my report.
Thank you so much. Okay, before I ask for motion, I just want to send a reminder to please check for the survey. It is so helpful having this much engagement that I really want to be as flexible as we can be to make sure that we're not impeding the ability that you have to run your cities by having these meetings, because we want you here. We want your feedback. We want you to be able to come. So please answer that survey so that we can make sure that we schedule this at a time that works, best for the most engagement possible, keeping in mind that we also have a remote option, a digital option. That being said, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Thank
Aye.
you so much
Aye.
for being here. And some of you we will see at LPC at the trust, local governments trust soon.
Yep.